Now, when it comes to goals, this is the big thing. A goal without a plan is just a wish. I mentioned this earlier that you have to have these goals and you have to have where you're going, right? Somewhere on the map, you need to know where you're headed. And if you don't, you can just be, well, lost at sea, right? You could just be kind of wandering around and let's go over there. In this case, these guys might want to take a right turn and go over where it's a little bit clearer. But having some sort of a goal in place gives you a direction, gives you a point to head towards. And it's like having wind in your sails, right? You now have a destination. You now have the idea of where you're going to be, right, at the end of this, or at least really close to it, right? Hopefully you make it to your goal every time. But it's definitely wind in your sails. You have a little bit more gusto. You have a little bit more determination to get to that point, which is obviously always a really good thing. Let's talk about this Harvard survey that came out recently. They interviewed the graduating class. 84% of the people that were graduating from Harvard, it's not like it was a local community college, from Harvard, 84% of them didn't have any specific goals. Now, 13% of them did have goals, but just kind of had them in their head. Here's what I want to achieve. 3% had clear, written down plans to accomplish them. They're all ready to go. And the results of this were pretty wild. The 13% that had the goals in their head were earning, on average, twice as much as the 84% that didn't know what they were going to do. But what really it blows it away here is the 3% that had the clear goals written out, the plan to get there, were making 10 times as much as the other 97% put together. So just writing the goals down, having a clear state of mind of where you're going to go and a destination obviously is a huge piece of this. And writing them down is a big piece of it. It kind of solidifies it in your mind a little bit more. Set a minimum too. So you have to have a deadline or a goal. Is it December 31st? Is it Q1 that you want to have a goal to get to a certain point and kind of work in different rocks? And each quarter you have a different goal. Definitely you want a 1-year goal. And for our company, we actually do a 3-year goal and a 10-year goal to always have, these long-term goals out there so that kind of where you're headed in the long term. Like a long vacation, you got to stop along the way at the different hotels, but where you're headed long term. So having all of those things set up, obviously very important. And then starting to break those down into quarterly, maybe monthly goals. You have to have a stopping point, whether that's a year, whether that's 3 months, or whether that's 1 month. You have to have some sort of a, did we achieve it or did we not kind of point. And quite honestly, another thing that could be on this slide is you should probably set up some consequences for yourself if you don't hit that goal. Something that really hurts and drives you to really hit those goals is always a great thing as well. So let's talk about some goals specifically for window treatment and awning company business owners that you can do for this year. So obviously one of the big ones and the most easiest ones is revenue target. What is your revenue target for the coming year? Divide that by 12 so that you can figure out how much you need to do monthly. And we're going to kind of go through some of this. Another thing you should know is what's your average transaction value. So out of all the jobs you did, divide the revenue by how many jobs you did, and that'll tell you the average job number. From there, you can figure out how many leads you need, how many calls that will require. This is all on workbook pages 4 and 5 as well. So if you don't have that, but we're not going to start there. We're going to talk first about 24. What were your numbers there? And, this is the point where you can go back and say, okay, here's how we did. We had an up year, we had a down year, but we can start to get those details now. So how many installs did you do per month? Average that out over the course of 12, over the course of a year, divided by 12, obviously, and you'll know how many installs you did in a year. Then you can figure out what is your average cost per lead. So how much did it cost you in marketing dollars to get those leads or those installs? That one's a little harder to do if you're not tracking. If you're not tracking every single lead that comes in and the source where it came from, highly recommend you set some sort of system up like that. And we'll actually talk about one later that is a great fit to make sure you have this cost per lead. And that's the great thing about tracking is if you know which is working and which cost per lead is the best, do more of that, right? Also, conversion rate. So what is your conversion rate for all the leads that came in? Now, I will say a lot of business owners say, oh, if I get a lead, I close 8 out of 10. I'm a good 70, 80%. The reality is that there's probably a lot lower because there should be a lot more leads coming in from a lot more places. So if you have a limited amount of leads coming in, your conversion rate probably is a little higher. But as you start to do more marketing and get your name out in front of more people, that conversion rate is probably going to go down, quite honestly, to 30, 40% maybe. That's pretty much the average for our clients because of the volume of leads that are coming in. That's about where they're closing those leads. And then, as I mentioned earlier, what's your average job worth? This number continues to rise as the costs rise and vendors keep raising their prices, things like that. But what is your average job worth? Now, in the workbook, one thing you can do is check this out. There's a great little worksheet that you can do. Plug in your numbers. And if you have the numbers from the last couple of years, put them all in there. I mean, you want a really good picture of what you're doing. Put them in there over the last couple of years. Plug in how many installs you did each year and, how much your average customer was worth. You'll probably see that number going up just because of cost. And if it's not going up, then you may need to rethink the pricing side of what you're doing. Plug these numbers in. Average customer value, annual renew added will be calculated automatically by how many installs you do. And that will give you a good idea of where you're going to go or what revenue you're going to hit and go from there. Obviously, you change the numbers around, make it something that's realistic, but also a little bit lofty so that, what you don't want to do is set some crazy goals every year or every quarter and consistently not hit them, right? That gets a little bummer after a while. So stay realistic, but, don't also cut yourself back on your potential. So let's go ahead and plug in your 2025 numbers into this sheet. How many installs do you want to do per month? You can figure that out by what you did last year, obviously. Add a little bit to that, maybe add 10%, 25%, however aggressive you think you can be. What is your average cost per lead? So how much does it cost you to get somebody to say yes? What is your conversion rate for the leads? We talked about that. And then what is your average job worth? Now, once you do that, you'll have a really good, clear picture of the coming year and how much revenue you can do, how much you can add. Now, on this worksheet at the bottom, there's another tab. And once you have these numbers plugged in, the other tab shows up. And this tab shows you how to allocate that money and potential growth and what you need to invest, where you need to run ads, how much you need to spend on ads, those kinds of things. If you think, oh my gosh, that's too much, or that's too little, or I think we can be a little more aggressive, go back to the other tab and kind of change the number of installs you want to do. You can't really change your monthly income per job unless you raise your prices, of course. But, plug that in too and say, well, if I raise my prices by 10%, how is that going to affect us, from the ad standpoint, from conservative profit, that kind of stuff. So plug that in. The last two numbers at the bottom there, it says months to pure profit and conservative. Those are, if you did this plan with these numbers, this is how long it would take you to see an ROI. So to see profit. And then we've got a conservative in there just in case your numbers are a little off. That'll help you out as well. So in the chat, go ahead, plug this into your workbook as well. How many leads do you need per month in order to close all these jobs? And that's the big one on this worksheet. One of the things you'll see is if you are getting 100 leads a month and you're closing 30% of those, then you're only getting, 30 jobs or 30 yeses, right? So there are some things you can change. You can raise prices. You can get some sales training. There's different levers you can pull in order to help increase these numbers. But plug that number into your workbook there. If you want to put it in chat, I'd love to share it with you and help you shoot towards that goal in the coming year. But I encourage you to really kind of set this revenue number and number of leads and cost per lead, all these different things that you can do over the coming year.